The Purple Line is a community podcast bringing you in-depth conversations with diverse leaders in the public and private sectors. Whether you're a student looking to gather advice or a professional tuning in for valuable resources, our dynamic programming provides tips for all ages and backgrounds. I'm your host, Keith Fernandez, and this is The Purple Line. Rafael Bernal is a staff writer for The Hill, where he covers Hispanic politics by focusing on Latino leaders, issues that affect the Latino community at a national level, including Puerto Rico, and relations between the United States and Latin America. Through The Hill Latino, Rafael has opened, to the mainstream, coverage of a political phenomenon that is at the center of political discourse in the United States. Rafael previously worked at United Press International as managing editor. Before jumping into journalism, Rafael practiced law in his native Mexico City, focusing on real estate and tax consulting. Rafael has a master's degree in journalism from Northwestern University and an undergraduate law degree from Universidad Iberoamericana in Mexico City. Rafael Bernal, thank you for joining us on The Purple Line, covering all Latino issues on The Hill and for The Hill, which is so great. You are our first guest who is a journalist by trade, who is a recovering lawyer, which as a recovering lawyer, I totally understand too.
Right.
I mean, listen, the best part about that is being in recovery.
Definitely, yeah. I would not wish that profession on anyone. At least not on myself. Or you.
Ran away quickly there. But I wanted to dive right into it and talk about how you got into journalism. We have a wide swath of young people listening to the podcast, CHLI alums, potential CHLI alums. And I think that what is really interesting about your career is that I think we all see you now as being sort of the leader on Latino coverage and coverage for a lot of issues on Capitol Hill. But how'd you get started? What inspired you to go into journalism? And what's the most exciting part about covering Capitol Hill and all the agencies that it interacts with, and the White House too?
Well, you started off well with the recovering lawyer part. Yeah. I actually ended up in journalism because I was not enjoying being a lawyer, and it's sort of a good testament to, if you've taken one path and it's not working out for you, there's time to rethink things. I must have been about 30 or 31, and I realized, well, this is my last chance to go to grad school. Law in Mexico is undergrad, so so I said, well, what do I like to do? And a little bit of research, and I found Medill, the Northwestern University School of Journalism. And I said, well, I'm going to apply. I didn't think I was going to get in because I wasn't a particularly good student in undergrad. So I was like, well, I won't get in, and that'll just focus me, and I just won't be able to say I didn't try. Of course, I got in. So fast forward, I didn't have a couple of, one okay job, just doing editing and sort of website management, sort of, everybody's got to pay their dues kind of job straight out of grad school. And that company moved to Florida, and I didn't want to move to Florida at that time because I wanted to be in political journalism. Nothing against Florida, absolutely.
Even though nowadays, it's becoming a center of it.
It really is, except that this company moved to Boca specifically.
Oh, maybe not.
So yeah, there's a very particular kind of the best early bird specials kind of journalism.
I'm for it. $4.99 hash browns. I'm there.
Which, I think that might have been a missed opportunity. Yeah. But so I was basically let loose on DC. I had a visa, so I had essentially, technically that's not how it works, but essentially had 30 days to find another job or get out of the country.
Right.
Terrifying. And I walked into the Hill. I got my resume looked at, same way like journalism. I knew somebody who'd gone to grad school with me. Who knew somebody who worked at the Hill, and basically told the boss, oh, you should check this one out. That was it. And it's very DC, but it's not like the highest recommendation ever. It's like, you should check out this guy I've never even met. So I walk into the office, and I was applying for the lowliest job in DC journalism, which is a nighttime or weekend editor. Okay. I was like, well, I guess this is how it's going to have to be. I only have 30 days. It's first job they offer. So I'm chatting with our editor in chief, Bob Cusack, great guy, and he's kind of looking distracted, and you never want to see that in a. Yeah. I was like, oh no, am I tanking this? Like, yeah. What? And he's like, sorry if I interrupt, but do you really want to be like an editor, or would you like to be a reporter? Like, wow, clearly I want to, and actually a mentor had told me that there's only one right answer to that question. Mm-hmm. You have to say it depends on the content. Mm. And that's what I said. And he beamed. Bob Cusack was happy. It depends on the content. Well, because we are thinking of opening this Latino vertical at the Hill, and we need somebody who's fully bilingual, who can cover the Latino community and has a passion for it. And so would you like to interview for that or the editing job? I'm like, no, the reporting job. Let's forget about the weekend editor. And, from there, I got the job. I have to say it was pretty tough the first year because it was breaking new ground and nobody really knew what Latino coverage looked like, which is crazy because it's not like Latino suddenly we showed up in 2016. This is 2016, the year that Latinos were huge in politics already. But nobody knew how to do Latino coverage for general audiences because you tell me, nobody cared. I don't know. Yeah. It just hadn't happened enough before because it had happened, obviously, but not enough. And so the first year was tough, but from there on, the Hill and I, we grew together and the following, what is it now? The following almost 7 years have been great.
It's awesome. And, it's interesting you talk about, like, the fact that there had not really been an established vertical, especially, like, in Washington, D.C., covering Latinos and how they influence the public policy discourse. One of the things I always wonder is, how do you cover the Latino community, knowing it's so different? I think so. If you're not Latino or if you're not versed in Latino issues, you're like, oh, Latinos, that's them. Instead of like breaking it down, to Nicaraguans, Cubans, Venezuelans, how does that show up in your coverage, and how does that show up in how you convey it to a reader who might not be familiar with really the nuances of the community and has, 8, 9, 10 paragraphs in your story to get the full picture? Yeah.
Yes, I'm going to extend the Latino community is not a monolith. What that means in 3 words or fewer? No, so. There's a certain advantage to doing it from DC because all the coverage is political. Right. So you sort of laser focus on issue by issue. Yeah. And that tends to segregate the people affected by a certain policy. And I include Haitians in Latinos. Mm-hmm. Not everybody does. I do because the whole Latino versus Hispanic, that's a 19th century French thing. Yeah. They only came up with the word Latin American because they wanted to excuse their involvement in the region because Hispanic didn't really fit them, but they were all Latin. So it's Latin America. So the French, free for all. That's to do with Cinco de Mayo, actually, but let's not get into that. So I do include Haitians, and also because Haitians are probably the most undercovered, both diaspora in the United States and the most undercovered country in the Western Hemisphere. So I bring up the Haitians because if I need to write a story about Haitian immigration, I'm gonna have Haiti in the headline and dive deep into that. If there's a story that has to do with basically any country of origin, that's going to, it's going to be very obvious. So that makes it easier for me. It's also pretty easy with Cuban Americans because Cuban Americans have made a political name for themselves and have participated in politics actively and influentially for decades. 6 decades or let's give it 6 decades.
more or less.
Since 1959.
Yeah, there was a time there when we thought maybe not so much, but
Before 1959, it's not that present. After 1959, it is very present.
My grandfather would of course disagree and say, well, Jose Marti was here, back in. I know, but that was one guy.
It's true, and every community has that one guy.
Yeah.
The hardest community to segregate in that way, oddly enough, is the Mexican American community, because it's the largest, and there's so many people out of Hispanic life that don't really see the difference between a Mexican and a Salvadoran or a Honduran or a Guatemalan, or even some South Americans. Yeah. I'm not forgetting Nicaraguans here, but again, Nicaragua's a little bit special because it's had that unique political
history, right? I mean, and recognition among the American people. Like, people, you say Ortega and Sandinistas, and people go, "Oh yeah, I get it." Yeah, and they don't necessarily have that same touch point with like a Guatemala or an El Salvador.
And there was Nicara, so far the most successful, other than the 1986 amnesty, the most successful immigration reform program in modern U.S. history was targeted toward Nicaraguans, and they have a different. They tend to zig when the rest of Central America is zagging, so they show up a little bit differently. Colombians show up a little bit differently because of that special relationship with the United States. Yeah. But it tends to be Northern Central America and Mexico. They're just piled into one, and they're like, oh, those guys are Hispanic. Yeah. And so there sometimes I do have to make the distinction. Sometimes a little explanatory paragraph. Not as basic as Guatemala and Mexico are different things. Also, although sometimes it seems that would be necessary, but I trust my readers more, and if somebody who can't make that distinction is reading my story and is confused, well, that's on them for not paying attention to social studies.
I agree. There's a big wide internet out there, but only believe some of it. So speaking of sort of making distinctions, I think one of the things that is always really interesting to me about your coverage is that you really dispel, or it seems to me like you dispel the misconception that there are like Latino issues. Like it seems like I have been involved in campaigns before for a Hispanic member of Congress, but like. There was always this like recurring media narrative, like what are the Latino issues? And it's just funny because it's like, it's almost presupposing that Latinos don't live in the same country that everyone else lives in. Right. And like the economy doesn't affect you, or education, or like infrastructure, or, really anything else. How do you really make sure to point out that like, yeah, guys, first of all, there aren't like Latino issues per se, and Latinos are actually really engaged in voting on things that transcend ethnic and racial lines. Right.
There was one Latino issue historically in U.S. politics, and since 2016, that Latino issue has been addressed very proactively, and that was that Latinos were not participating enough in politics. They weren't voting enough. Where it's still not like Latinos are voting at the same rate as the general population. There's still lower participation, but it's not as bad as it once was. So that was the one Latino issue but that stemmed from the fact that nobody was paying attention to what is now 20% of the U.S. population. I think, it's funny that you see it that I haven't proactively gone out of my way to go like, they care about the economy like everyone else, or we care about the economy like everyone else. Because it just, if you listen to even the advocates, it's better to go and like understand communities on the ground, but there are 65 million people. Like if you go around the country trying to understand every community intimately, well, you wake me up 20 years later when you're done, right? So I get a lot of stuff filtered through the advocates, and it's just the way people interact with political issues. It's just there are certain ways to reach certain Hispanic communities in the country that are different, but there are certain ways to reach certain, like Midwestern communities that are different, how you campaign in rural Pennsylvania, whether it's among Latinos who are very important in rural Pennsylvania right now, just as John Fetterman, or whether it's the Amish, and it's very different from how you would campaign in the Texas Panhandle. And the campaigns sort of inform our political coverage. The campaigns that are done right tell us a lot about the people who are voting, because when you see a certain message, and my favorite example with Latinos is the message that Bernie Sanders sent in the primaries in Nevada in 2020, or not primaries, the caucus. He captured the zeitgeist of the Latino voter in Nevada. What was the message? I want you to talk to me at 3 a.m. because I work in Vegas and my job starts at 1 a.m. and my lunch break is at 3 a.m. So that's when I want you to reach me. I want you to talk to me about economic issues in the filter of how they affect me, tourism and like whatever. I want you to talk to me about labor, about how I can protect my job. I want you to talk to me in Spanish, Mexican Spanish, because if you talk to me in Puerto Rican Spanish, I find it very entertaining. But I won't understand half of it. And it was just the same analysis like a campaign would do if you want to win a local race in suburban Illinois, and you're like, wait, okay, what's the buzz in the school district? What are parents in the school district? White parents, Latino parents, whatever. What are they talking about? Anyway, that Nevada campaign to me is they figure out how what that group wanted to hear. They talked to them. They got results. Now we know, a little bit indirectly, but now we know what activates that crowd politically. And it's different. The only thing is there's a lot of studying because because Latino voters throughout the country can be so different. There's a lot of similarities, but they can be so different. The accent thing is, Puerto Rican or Cuban. I don't want to call them dialects. What is it?
Well, I mean, I guess so, right? I mean, dialect or or just Spanish, the type of Spanish.
Accent, slang. Just the beat to it.
And some ads just don't land. I remember there was an ad, not to call it the group, but I will call it the ad that was about La Chancla, and that does they heard it in Miami, and people were like, "What are they talking about?" Right. And so it was so specific to each community, and it totally still is. And I wonder if that's sort of it is a more sophisticated campaign driving Latino turnout, or was Latino turnout sort of going to drive itself already and then campaigns just caught up? We've seen Latinos voting more and more at record numbers.
Well, I think one of the things is, and you see this to a certain extent in both parties, the Republicans have a head start in Florida. Democrats have a bit of a head start in the rest of the country. Especially in more Mexican American parts, California, Texas, the Southwest. I think the jury's still out in the big cities like New York and Chicago. Maybe Chicago, not so much. But they have this head start in how you reach out to people, and it's sort of the two feed into each other. The more Latino representation you have, the more people with who know how to reach those communities are in power, and it's a virtuous cycle, really, and it worked really well. I mean, right now you're gonna have 9 new Democratic Hispanic members in the House, 5 new Republicans. They're both breaking records. And Republicans are breaking records for the second election in a row. Last time it was 4 new Republicans. The Congressional Hispanic Conference is actually a real group now. It's not just a little club of 3 or 4 guys,
It's got numbers. I remember back in the day. Oh my gosh, there was this. Who was it? There was a Portuguese congressman. back like in 2006.
Oh, not Valadao.
No.
Oh, it was
Old member. Gosh.
There's Costa, but he's a
No,
Democrat.
Costa.
I
No.
know who you're talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah. He's that guy from The Thing. We'll remember by the end of the show. And so, thinking about sort of like how Hispanic members in Congress are laying out their priorities, I feel like before, obviously, it was a small group, so you had to stick together. And so, have you seen Hispanic members of Congress just sort of diffuse into more discrete groups? And I guess what I mean by that is like before you had to march in lockstep on certain issues, be it immigration, be it some foreign policy issues. Now is it more kind of like, well, we can be a little bit more general market. We don't all have to vote the same way. Party aside, I mean, obviously Republican votes Republican, Democrat. But
So it's a diversity within the community.
Yeah.
So those 5 Republicans that are coming in, they're from 5 different states. Those 9 Democrats, they're from 9 different states.
Yeah.
There is a little bit overlap. There's a Democrat and a Republican from California, and a Democrat and a Republican from, is it New York?
Yeah, New York is
might be New York.
Yeah.
I might be blanking on what. Oh, Oregon.
Yeah.
Oregon.
Who knew?
Yeah, there are 2 Latinas coming in from Oregon, one very far left, one pretty far right. And so, that diversity of within the Latino community and that political, geographic, et cetera, diversity. Age diversity, not so much. That's the one interesting thing. We still are a very young demographic, and that's exciting for a lot of reasons. That's exciting, because it's a demographic that's going to be building wealth or should be building wealth for the next 20 or 30 years. Yeah. It's a demographic that will be building political power almost certainly. You don't want to jinx that one, but and it's a community that's going to have a cultural stamp on this country for the next 20 or 30 years. Like if let's admit it. I don't want to admit it because of my age, but if you're younger, you're cooler. And if you're cooler, your stuff sells better.
I know. Same. I know. Don't tell me that. I get less young every day. So.
Yeah. Beats the alternative.
Yeah, true. It's true. Talking about diversity a little bit and switching gears, sort of back to journalism and diversity of representation. For so many years, I mean, I grew up in Miami, and a lot of Latino anchors and reporters were Hispanic. When I came to DC, less so. I mean, I think you're, one of the notable exceptions when I got here. And then even now, even though I know I see more Latinos, on networks, in print, online, broadcast, social media, the whole thing. What's the future of Latinos in journalism? Is it, in addition to piloting a lot of, covering Latino issues, is it going general market as well? Is it, creating other platforms? What do you think is next?
Well, there's a lot of debate there. Yeah. Of course, there's a lot of debate. That's one of the things that's true pretty much across the board with Latinos. Like controversy.
Yeah,
controversy
exactly.
is good, because it's fun, and it's almost a healthy. It can sometimes get unhealthy, but so with Latino journalism, I think you're right. It has grown a ton. 6 years, was it 6 or 6 years ago, almost 7 years ago, when I started the Hill, I knew maybe 3 other Latino journalists, and they mostly didn't want to be known as that. I remember like a very amazing colleague who's still in the business told me, and I'm not gonna say the name because I think this person was wrong. Yeah. But told me, try to get out of the Latino thing because you don't want to be typecast, because that part of the industry is this big. Yeah. And it's basically a dead end. Right. I was like, scared, but at the same time, I mean, a little bit recklessly, I went like, well, I don't care. if I get typecast and I hit a dead end, I'm having so much fun and I'm exploring something new that I don't care. Yeah. Maybe my story would have changed if this person had been right. Maybe I changed my tune. But there were a lot of them are still, the people who were active 6 years ago are still in the business. But there are so many young new people. Not enough. I mean, there's almost never enough. Minority representation is challenging because it's not really a numbers game. Like you don't need 20% of every industry to be Latino and 20% of every industry to be Black and 6% of every industry to be AAPI. You need any Latino who wants to get in this industry and has the talent and puts in the hard work to do it, to have equal opportunity to get in there. That's, it's beyond just mathematical. Is journalism there? Maybe at the reporting level. Mm-hmm. Definitely not at the leadership level. But let's face it, journalism is not there at the leadership level for women. Yeah. Or for African Americans. Yeah. Like and that fight has been, as long as a Latino fight in this country, but has been more high profile for much longer. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if, other measures of like LGBTQ representation at high levels. Probably not. Yeah. I don't know. I don't have statistics on that, but like many other major industries, it is still dominated by the same people it was dominated by 30 years ago. Some because they're very valuable, like I don't want Bob Woodward to retire. Yeah. If he keeps writing books, I'm happy. But in a certain sense, because the diversifying movement of the last quarter century, and that's accelerated, I would argue, over the last 5 to 10 years, has not had time to reach the upper echelons. And you know what? And the same thing that happens with how we were talking about more Latinos in political power means there's more Latinos campaigning for Latino voters, and Latino voters more excited to vote. Virtuous circle. Yeah. You haven't gotten there. Like a lot of industries, including journalism, have not gotten to that point because, not everybody can be like, like my boss, Bob Cusack, who went like, wait, light bulb, this is how we're going to do this. Yeah. And, I'm very happy about that, but not everybody in Bob's position has, seems to have, seen that light.
Yeah. No, and point taken also on, if you see yourself reflected, you also are able to do to go for those jobs. And speaking of which, final question to wrap up, we've got a lot of future leaders listening. What would be your advice to them if they want to get into journalism or switch careers, but really get into journalism and be a reporter, editor, or really anything else?
I think to get into journalism, the first thing that took me years to get this through my thick skull is learn about issues and trust that your voice has authority. If your first job will probably be as a blogger and you'll work horrible hours, and it is not the profession for people who like high starting salaries. It just isn't. So you'll be overworked, underpaid. You'll have a lot of fun. Your writing will get better. You will write 6 or 7 stories a day. You will learn. Like that is, I think the people who get hired as sort of breaking news bloggers, whether, I've seen it at the Hill a lot, but even in other papers, they become amazing writers because they just have to do it. Yeah. It's just like, it just crams 10 years of practice into hopefully less than 2 years because you don't want to live like that for too long. But just trust that once you know an issue, you can analyze it, analyze, don't insert opinion, but all that they teach you at journalism school. But once you're being published, your voice carries authority. Use that authority, measure yourself,
Yeah.
You don't become Bob Woodward the first time you get a byline.
Yeah.
Fair. But also trust yourself. I think that was the hardest one. And for career changers, if you're thinking about it enough, do it. I think I'll end with the immigrant pitch. Like a lot of us that come to this country, I wasn't oppressed in Mexico. I didn't need to leave Mexico. I just couldn't be a journalist there. Now definitely couldn't, because now it's dangerous. But because we talk about underpaid, but not only underpaid, but it's just not. There aren't the institutions. There's not the framework where you can learn and become better and become really good at it. Your chances of making it and doing something special are so much bigger. So, that should be encouraging to just go all right, I'm going to put in the hard work, because good things can and often do come of it.
I love that. I think it's a great closing thought, and it's absolutely right. So Rafael Bernal, thank you for joining us and walking on the Purple Line. We'll see you soon.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to The Purple Line. You can follow me at _Keith Fernandez on Twitter, and make sure to follow CHLI across all social media platforms at the CHLI for the latest updates.